Welcome back to another episode of Télévision Éducative. Tonight, I'll show you how dreams are prepared. People think it's a very simple and easy process, but it's a bit more complicated than that. As you can see, a very delicate combination of complex ingredients is the key. First, we put in some random thoughts, and then we add a little bit of reminiscences of the day, mixed with some memories from the past. It's for two people. Love, friendships, relationships, and all those ships, together with songs you heard during the day, things you saw, and also personal. Okay, I think it's one.
Hi, my name is Nikki, and I'm a psychology major at UC Berkeley. I've created this podcast in the hopes of educating y'all about sleep. The topic of the day will have to do with dreams, and I'm going to use media, particularly film, as a reference to connect scientific concepts of sleep and dreaming, because it's a more fun way of learning. I'm hoping you will learn something new from this podcast that you can share with your friends, families, and peers. So I just want to say that sleep is underrated and it's absolutely necessary. We know that there are studies out there that have shown a correlation between sleep and memory consolidation. So that's really important in memorizing facts or even motor memory when it comes to learning things like basketball and even something like typing on a computer, typing speed. We know that it helps to modulate the immune system. We know that it helps in maintaining good mental health, and that it also aids in growth and development in our earliest stages of life. And yet what's baffling is that science still hasn't figured out the exact reason as to why we sleep or dream and what their primary functions are. We still don't know. And there are a few guesses as to why we dream, but they're only theories. So before we get into dream theories and movies, I think it's really important to establish some basics on sleep and dreaming. We want to ask ourselves, what are dreams? Really think about that. And when do they happen? There are different definitions of dreams. Some people have looser definitions of dreams, but the one I'm going to talk about today is a kind which most people and many sleep researchers would say is a dream. These dreams are bizarre. They usually have a hallucinatory quality to them, and they happen during the REM stage of sleep. So let me backtrack a bit and explain these stages of sleep. Humans and many other mammals are capable of having different types of sleep. And there are two types of sleep that we can identify: non-REM sleep and REM sleep. Non-REM sleep, or non-rapid eye movement sleep, is subdivided into 4 stages: stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the further along you go in the stages of sleep, the deeper sleep you are in. So stages 3 and 4, you're in pretty deep sleep compared to stages 1 and 2. Now, stages 3 and 4 are sometimes combined, and we refer to this as slow wave sleep. The other type of sleep that we're mostly going to focus on is rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. And this is when those bizarre dreams happen. The reason why we've split up, or scientists split up, these two types of sleep is because in each stage of sleep, there are different physiological responses in the body. So I won't get too into that now, but it's pretty interesting, and science has figured out ways in measuring this. During sleep, during a big chunk of sleep, non-REM and REM sleep usually happen in cycles, and they happen in 90-minute cycles. So technically, you'll have this cycle about maybe 5, 6, 7 times a night, and technically you could have 5 to 7 dreams a night if you're getting the recommended amount of sleep, which is around 7 to 9 hours, which I doubt a lot of people are getting right now. So let's get into emotion regulation as a function of sleep. And what I mean by emotion regulation is that it's something almost akin to therapy, right? So, you're having life issues and you want to have a way of dealing with it. So you go to a therapist to talk about your problems. And in the brain and with sleep, it is possible to have some form of quote unquote overnight therapy. That's what sleep can do for you. And this phenomenon was demonstrated in a study at Professor Matt Walker's sleep lab at UC Berkeley. Healthy participants, they were asked to look at emotion-inducing images in an MRI, and then they were asked to look at these same images 12 hours later. So half of the participants, they were asked to look at these images in the same day without sleep. And the other half, they got to see these images 12 hours later with a night of sleep padded into those 12 hours. The MRI ended up showing that those that got sleep before looking at the images again, they had a significant decreased reactivity in the amygdala. And the amygdala is a part of the brain. It is the emotional part of the brain, which can create negative or painful feelings. In addition, with this group of participants, they saw that the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, the part of the brain that is all about decision making, it had an effect in which it inhibited emotional reactivity. Now, let's talk about the other half of these participants. The other half of the participants, they showed the same emotional reactivity to the images 12 hours later. So nothing changed in their reaction. So how do we know that there's not some sort of confounding variable or that, these results are valid? Well, the researchers, they ended up recording the sleep patterns of all the participants, and they ended up finding brain activity that indicated a drop in stress-related brain chemistry during the dream stage, pretty much reinforcing the findings of the participants.
I'm talking quietly to not wake myself up. I'm with my dad. Yes, Dad. I remember. My father was there. It's nice to see him healthy and normal again. I almost forgot how he looked. Handsome, no? Oh yeah, we're in a concert. A Duke Ellington concert. Yes, my man, Duke Ellington. And the band starts to play. Bass, drums and all. It's amazing. They got this super swing. And the Duke enters the stage. He's radiant in a glowing white tuxedo.
El Duque. La última vez que lo vi fue en el Olympia en 1958. Muchas gracias, mis hijitos, por la invitación.
Oye, ¿pero qué es esto?
Este no es Duke Ellington. Este es un pato Ellington.
Dad, this is not Duke Ellington, but Doc Ellington. This is a dream.
¿Qué?
I'm sorry, Dad, but you're dead. You've lost the battle to cancer.
No, I cried so hard. I could feel my tears forming to rivers under my eyes.
So we've seen in studies that sleep and dreaming can be a way of working through your problems, working through your issues. And we see this particularly established in Michel Gondry's Science of Sleep. And a lot of the movie illustrates this theory of dreams having an inherent healing function. In the movie, the viewer witnesses Stefan, the main character, who is an artist and he's an inventor, and he resolves much of his day-to-day problems in his dreams. And we see that. We learn in the beginning of the film that his father had just passed and he has moved back into his childhood home in Paris. And he's grieving, and it's really evident as the audience sees several glimpses into some of his more happy and intimate memories of him as a young boy with his father in that apartment, in that space that they used to live together. And his grief is not completely abated, but it seems to wane further into the film. And we see him routinely deal with the conflicts of the day in a more bizarre and gravity-defying kind of way in his dreams. There is one particular dream sequence that I really loved, where he comically beats up his boss and he pushes him out of the window. His boss is still alive, and almost instantly, he turns into a haggard, homeless man with long hair in a matter of seconds, defying time and physiology, essentially. Stefan ends up taking over the business, his boss's business, the one that he just beats up, and he posts his own artwork on the wall, the artwork that his boss had rejected and therefore was the cause of his anger and humiliation. And then he ended up having sex with his coworker on top of a copy printer. At one point in this dream, he's swimming through the skies of Paris, and the buildings are mixed with these Aztec pyramids. It's a reference to his Mexican identity, and his father was of Mexican descent. It's pretty out there, and imagery and the sense of space is disorienting and nonsensical, and time feels non-linear. It could be argued that the mind goes psychotic in the REM stage of sleep, and you see things that aren't there. You have no real sense of time or place, and for the most part, when you wake, you don't remember what happened. So we can't talk about dreams without talking about Sigmund Freud. And I think many of us know about Freud. He was known as the father of modern dream analysis, and he was kind of the father of psychoanalysis. And I think many of us have heard of Freud's famous Oedipus complex, which, to oversimplify, asserts that boys inherently envy their fathers and compete for their mother's attention and love. And basically everything goes back to the relationship you have with your parents, which I won't get into in this podcast. So going back to Freud and dream analysis, Freud's seminal work called Interpretation of Dreams outlined his theory on why he believed we dream, and this theory was entitled Disguised Censorship. So under the disguised censorship theory, Freud believed that we all have repressed wishes that play out in our dreams, and that if these desires or wishes were expressed in its raw form, unfiltered, these would be disturbing to us, and that would cause us to wake up. And so he believed that the brain, in order to prevent the body from waking, from seeing these desires or wishes in its rawest form, in its most unadulterated form, it has a filter in which disguises these desires as something else. So, in essence, these desires are censored. And Freud made a lot of money from this. He created a business of interpreting these desires, interpreting dreams, and he made some big bucks from it off of like wealthy white women. He was like the fortune teller of his day. And yet, right now, science has rejected this theory because his theory was not testable. It could not be proved or falsified. He didn't use a scientific method. But that's also why we still talk about this theory, because he didn't even come up with a hypothesis or use a scientific method to prove his hypothesis. So because of that, science still hasn't disproved it. But it is something that we have to talk about. And just a fun bit of info, Freud was a total cokehead, and it was common knowledge that he was using while he was penning this theory. And that's questionable, to say the least. I won't go over what cocaine usage does to cognition and sleep cycles, but I can tell you it's not good.
Spitting's a dirty habit.
I know a worse one.
So I want to talk about how Gondry has done a really great job of establishing the feelings of emotion, nostalgia, and bizarre visual imagery that we think of when we think of dreaming. And if you've watched some of his music videos, you can clearly see this kind of whimsy and almost arts and crafts, lo-fi look that has essentially defined his career and his aesthetic. The Science of Sleep is essentially a culmination of this aesthetic and vision. And I remember watching Bjork's Human Behavior music video as a kid in the early 90s. And this was one of the first music videos that I watched and actually remembered. This was when MTV actually played music videos. And I remember feeling enthralled by the premise of the video because it was just so fairy tale-like. It reminded me of Little Red Riding Hood or Goldilocks and the Three Bears. In the music video, she's eating from an oversized bowl and she's using oversized utensils and sitting at an oversized dining table. And she's walking through this forest made of fake trees and foliage. And there's clearly nothing realistic about it. And at one point, there's a bear, which was really a dude in a bear costume, chasing Bjork through a forest of fake trees and her randomly flying and then eventually falling down to the ground and getting up unscathed, not even a bruise on her body. And then at some point randomly, the bear's even driving a car. And there's this wonderful backdrop of the night sky and stars, but it looks as if it was made by an amateur set designer, maybe a 10-year-old set designer. The moon is clearly made of a styrofoam ball, like a slightly elevated version of one of those moons I did for my 5th grade science project. So I don't know if you remember this, but I think a lot of people in my age group will remember that when we were 11 years old, this was around 5th grade, we learned about the solar system and we had to do these projects where we had to make a scaled 3D model / diorama of the solar system. And mine was the typical standard one where you basically painted styrofoam balls, stuck them on some sticks and then handed it in as your project. And essentially this is what the set designed looked like, a more adult version of the dioramas and the cardboard robots, the glow-in-the-dark ceiling stars, the nightlights of fairy tales. I could go on, all in one music video. The point is that he's one of those directors and creators out there that can create a dream world that is palpable and relatable without using those big CGI effects and the big budgets. So I really recommend The Science of Sleep. It's a great interpretation of expressing what happens in an individual when they're dreaming. It's really fantastical and the imagery is great. And they do integrate some neuroscientific kind of jargon or language into the movie. And this isn't Michel Gondry's first movie having to do with neuroscience. In 2005, he did a movie called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and that has to do with having the capability to erase memories, selective memories. So I would check that out if you are interested in a more fun and whimsical interpretation of what happens when you sleep and memory. So moving away from the science of sleep and this kind of dream world that is, very lo-fi, low budget, we got to get into Inception. And I'm going to talk about this film, which I'm sure my professors and many sleep scientists hate talking about. But we had to talk about it because its main focus is on lucid dreaming. And we have to define lucid dreaming. There's 2 definitions. The first definition states that lucid dreaming is merely when a person is aware of the fact that they're sleeping. The second definition, however, refers to the ability to control what you do in a dream. So, for example, I'm going into REM sleep and I know I'm dreaming and I have the capability of controlling what I do. I can tell myself, oh, go fly in the sky or go run. That is what the second definition of lucid dreaming means. And so for science, this kind of poses a problem. This is a thing, but how can science measure or study lucid dreaming if a person is asleep and has lost almost all of their motor function? So a study by Stephen P. LaBerge et al. Of Stanford University learned how to communicate with lucid dreamers through an agreed upon means of communication through eye movements. So we know that when we're in REM sleep, we go into a phase of sleep where we lose all motor function. The prefrontal cortex shuts down. We have the amygdala that's, hyperactive. And, coming up with this kind of Morse code of communication with dreamers while they're sleeping is pretty cool. And so, for example, a researcher and a participant will decide that when they're in a dream, they will move their eyes toward the left 5 times to indicate that they're running. And if they dart their eyes twice to the left and once upwards, this could mean that the participant is flying. This is just an example. It's pretty remarkable stuff. So this whole plot line revolves around the ability to invade someone's mind and kind of inculcate an idea into their subconscious through a shared dream. While this idea of sharing dreams is not plausible, it is worth noting that the movie does a great job of envisioning the kind of fantastical and gravity-defying possibilities of dreaming in a more realistic way. So a lot of CGI graphics and, computer animation, all that stuff. I think that there are some ways in which the movie doesn't get things right. And we know this because we see that the characters are capable of controlling their movements in dreams. That's that second definition. But we also see that the characters, while dreaming, have a very rational thought process.
So you knew about these risks, and you didn't tell us. There weren't meant to be any risks. I didn't know we'd be dealing with a load of gunfire. You had no right. This was the only way to go 3 layers deep.
And you knew about this and went along with it.
I trusted him.
You trusted him when he promised you half his share?
No, his whole share. Besides, he said he'd done it before.
We've done it before. What, with Mal? Because that worked so good?
It has nothing to do with it. I did what I had to do to get back to my children.
So you led us into a war zone with no way out.
There is a way out. All right, we continue
So this
on
scene
with the job
took place
as fast
in
as
which,
possible. Get out,
they found out some pretty compromising information about Cobb's intentions in the movie. That's the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And the person that is the interrogator is Arthur, which is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character. And you see him having this kind of exchange with Cobb, and it's very rational, and he seems very clear in mind looking at his past and their history and the kind of danger that Cobb has put them in, that kind of realization. This doesn't make any sense if we were to talk about what happens in REM sleep and dreaming. We know that the prefrontal cortex shuts down completely, and we know that the amygdala is hyperactive during this time. So there's no way in a dream that even if they're lucid dreaming, that they could have these conversations, these rational conversations, because the brain has already shut that down as an individual enters into REM sleep. So one important question is, has this been tested by science? And we know that it has been tested by science. There was a study that was done at Heidelberg University in Germany, a study by a group of scientists in which they used transdirectional cranial stimulation to basically manipulate the activation of the prefrontal cortex during REM sleep, and that was to increase lucidity while dreaming. And the results showed no significant change of increased lucidity. And the study basically proved that for now, that both lucid and non-lucid dreamers alike are not capable of being rational or practicing good judgment while they're in REM sleep.
They feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of
So I think
what's
there's some
going on.
truth to this observation of when we dream, we don't quite remember how we got there, or what time it is, or where we're at. So that kind of disorienting factor, which is characteristic of REM sleep and therefore dreaming, is pretty true. I would say that's pretty plausible. But later on in the movie, regarding temporal awareness in the film, the characters do talk about how time passes differently in dream world versus reality.
5 minutes? What? We were talking for like at least an hour.
In a dream, your mind functions more quickly, therefore, time seems to feel more slow.
5 minutes in the real world gives you an hour in the dream.
So again, we ask ourselves, is there any truth to this statement? Is this in real life? Another study done by the same researchers at Heidelberg University in Germany, they ended up using that same predetermined Morse code-like form of communication with eye movements, the same kind that they use with lucid dreamers in this study. And, inevitably they found that there was no difference found for relative times. There were no disproportional time effects. And that more complex motor tasks did not result in more prolonged times. And that, there were some data that showed that longer durations in lucid dreams did happen. But that might be more related to the lack of muscular feedback or slower neural processing through REM sleep, because during REM sleep, the body does shut down all motor function in the body.
The brain is the most complex thing in the universe, and it's right behind the nose.
Fascinating!
So there you have it. Although dreaming has remained ubiquitous through human history and it's been a topic of fascination for many, it is also fascinating that science still hasn't figured out the exact function for dreams and, by extension, sleep. And while the brain may arguably be one of the most misunderstood parts of our body, the mystery and the possibilities for discovering new information on how our brain works is limitless, and we have a lot of technology that's going to help us figure that out. We know the importance of sleep, and we know how essential it is to our health and well-being. I hope you don't take it for granted. And I hope that after hearing this information that you'll appreciate a good night's sleep just a little bit more. I'm going to have a list of the references of the studies and the movies that I talked about in this podcast. So check it out if you're really into sleep and dreams and studies and all that good stuff. My name is Nikki, and to quote Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.